sent the title for this morning's message, I sent it very carefully. And the truth is, I obscured it just a little bit. And I put Hagar's discovery. Because I didn't want someone to read what I was really thinking at the beginning. And they go, boy, this is one that I'm not going to listen and pay much attention to. But since confession is good for the soul, I can confess to you the one that I really wanted to use. How's that? And it's real simple. When you've been wrong. When you've been wrong. Think about the scene, if you would with me for a little bit. The scene is in the desert. The only sounds that can be heard, other than that of the blowing wind, are the sounds the Scripture tells us of a sobbing woman. And why is she crying? Because the moaning that is being heard is that of her dying son. She is lost in the desert. She has no food, and her water has run out. She is waiting for no one. She's literally waiting on death itself. Hagar presents that unbelievable picture of severe desperation. However, it's to that lost and to that dying woman that God speaks. And he interrupts her sobbing. And his comment takes the form of a question. We just read it. He said, Hagar, what's your problem? As I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, when it comes to preaching, I like to have a few things, a few ways to hang my ideas on some hanger somewhere along the line. So let me give you three simple ones. The implications of God's question to Hagar. We'll talk about that. How Hagar responded, or Hagar's response to those questions. And then the last one, which is beautiful. It's God's answer to this really most pathetic story. When God asked Hagar, what is it that ails you, or what's your problem? It carried with it some real heavy implications. Let me give you just a few of them. The most obvious implication is the realization to Hagar that I have not lost you. You feel lost, but I have not lost you. He knew where she was at. She had lost her way, but God had not lost her. Second facet to that implication was that it's also the idea that he's watching over her. Not only what's wrong with you, but I'm watching over you. Now I'll have to confess, a few times as a young parent, many years ago, when my children would get a little rambunctious and we would be in a mall or we would be in some place, the big department store or something, and they wouldn't listen. Now, maybe my kids are the only ones afflicted with that. and they would listen, okay? I had this little thing that I would game I play every once in a while. I'd make sure that I was outside, but not very far away. Just long enough for them to do their thing and finally to turn around and go. And I'd say, Leah, Ben? And they would kind of settle down. I told you, stay close. Kind of this story. Hagar, what's ailing you? Oh, by the way, Hagar, I know exactly where you're at. You've traveled far, but you've not traveled that far. You've not traveled beyond my knowledge of you, and you certainly have not traveled beyond my presence. And Hagar, I'm right here. psalmist picked up on that wonderful thought in the 137th Psalm when David said, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? He said, if I go up to the heavens, guess what? You're there. If I go make my bed in the depths, you're there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, you're there. If I settle on the far side of the sea, you're there. Even there, your hand will guide me, and your right hand will uphold me and hold me fast. Quite an implication when God said, Hagar, where are you? Hagar, what's wrong? Hagar means I'm watching over you. The question also implies that God knew about what was going on. Not only Hagar, what's ailing you, it was that question of, hey, you want to tell me about it? That heavy implication. What aileth you, Hagar? And that's God's way of saying to her in a very special way, I know there's something wrong. Do you want to tell me about it? Do you want to talk about it? Hagar knew there was something definitely wrong. She couldn't figure anything out. God knew what the story was. He knew what was going on. And I would simply insert here just something to think about. Never underestimate God's ability to empathize with your situation. He knows you. And He knows what's going on. And He knows this very moment. A third little implication of this question is that he implies that he wants Hagar to tell him her story. I guess a good therapist would say this is God teaching us how to do good therapy. Tell me your story. Hagar, take me into your confidence. And tell me what's bothering you. Tell me what's going on. What's making for the marring of all your, and the wrecking of all your hopes and all of your dreams. Hagar, do you want to tell me about it? It's really comforting to know that God has that same listening spirit today. Remember how anxious Jesus was to always listen to those who sought Him out. I love that little story about the lady in the Scripture said who had an issue of blood. The crowd was pressing in. No one could get near Jesus. If you've been to the Middle East, and you know what I mean when I say pressing in, because those people only walk shoulder to shoulder and you move in the crowd. It's not much fun. Jesus was in that kind of situation, and everyone was around him. Here was this lady with this incredible need, physical need, didn't know what she was going to do, and finally she just reached and kind of made a dive. I can see that she made a dive for Jesus, and all she got was just a little piece of his heart. You remember his response? Who touched me? He was more interested, he always was, more interested in the story of one than in the crowd of many. It's an old hymn that says it well. It said, I must tell Jesus all of my troubles. I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, for Jesus will help me. Jesus can help me. Jesus alone. And another implication, and we'll move off the implications in a moment. The question also implied that if Hagar would only tell her story, and this is really kind of a direct implication, if you'll tell me your story, there's something I can do about it. That's a heavy one. I talked a couple weeks ago about the fact that I spent a lot of years as a chaplain and a lot more years as a pastor. And many of you have been in helping professions as well. And you learn after a while, unless you've got an unlimited budget, you learn after a while to be careful how you ask your question. Because your question might imply you've got the ability to help. A homeless person is coming in off the street, or somebody needs financial assistance, or whatever you go on and on. I'm not going to be very quick back in those days because I didn't have the budget to say, so what would you like for me to do? Because it's only going to prompt probably that I can't do it. That's not the Father. When he asked Hagar, what's ailing? It was a direct implication when he said, I can help you with it. You see, he was not asking her to bear her wounds for nothing. There's really not much value in that action. Sacrificing our individuality merely in the pursuit of being open and transparent doesn't often go very far. But he implied that he could assist. Come with the assurance when we come to him that he will listen, and that having listened, he will meet us at the point of our need. We'll move from those implications for a few moments. When God said to Hagar, what's ailing you? How did Hagar respond? Well, if you've read that story and read it often enough, if you haven't, I'd encourage you to read it. Genesis chapter 21. But let me tell you this before you get started. Hagar's response is not printed. There's probably a reason for that. Some have suggested that the reason it was not printed was because whatever it would be printed upon couldn't have handled it. It was pretty hot. And if ever a woman had a story to tell, believe me, Hagar had a story to tell. However, she finally opens up and begins to tell God the story as it happened. And it goes a little bit like this. She said, you know, a few years ago I became the servant of the family of Abraham. They claimed that they served the God who made the rivers to flow. And little by little, I came to share in their same faith. Later, in our journey, I discovered that the husband and the wife had but one dream, and that was upheld by a promise that God had made to Abraham. You see, Abraham was no ordinary man. In him, all of the nations of the earth were to be blessed. But after several years went by, the child that they had hoped for did not come. It did not look likely that he would come. And his wife told him that he should turn elsewhere for the fulfillment of their dream. And she gave me, Hagar said, her servant to her husband. Was I to blame? Was I not just a slave? Was it not my duty to do the command of my master? Hagar said, so when I held my son in my arms, I felt no shame. I felt only abounding joy. However, one day, God made good on his promise. And Sarah gave birth to her firstborn son. And they named him Isaac. And from that hour on, I was never accepted. Now, only 2 days ago, the long overdue break came. Sarah demanded that I be booted out of their home. I tell you what, Fred, I think this is pretty close. So, you asked for it, here it is. Here I am. Lost, hungry, my son died, and I'm the victim of another person's sin. Well, that's quite a story. That's a story of a tragic wrong. There's no way in the world you can hide your eyes from that. And God didn't shut his eyes from that tragic wrong either. To add insult to injury, Hagar added this little line, somewhere along the line. We're going to have to let me see if we can make it a contemporary line. Hagar added the line. She said, Abraham was a pious man. Now, paraphrase. Abraham was a member of the church. He was considered a church leader. And because of all of that, the danger that Hagar was facing was not just the danger of hating Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. Hagar was facing the danger of hating God himself. Well, that's a little bit about her response. Let's talk about how God answered those questions. He, to begin with, did not encourage Hagar to stubbornly nurse her grief and keep her pain and her hate alive. See, Hagar must learn. It's this way as well. Hagar must learn to leave God to deal with Abraham and you. And I must learn to leave God to deal with who it is that's wrong with you. I love the response of the father to Hagar. Fear not. Hagar, you're not forgotten. Your lad will not be destroyed. Your lad will not be thrown away. I have heard your son. His pitiful cries have not only broken your heart, they've also broken my heart. Remember something. My heart is more tender than yours. And if you're grieved, Hagar, my grief is greater. If you're suffering, Hagar, my suffering is greater. And fear not, I am here to meet your needs and to deliver you and your son. Now, this little verse in here is probably one of the biggest realizations and eye-opening things I think probably I caught it a long time. The story tells us that then the Lord opened her eyes, so that she saw a fountain in the desert. And the fountain had been there all the time. God does not have to make special provisions for your salvation and for your healing. He already knew. And the fountain for your healing is already been provided. It was a few years ago, I was going down 33 and I went by Steak and Shake. Stop. Does anyone work at Steak and Shake? It's a compliment, by the way, so don't worry about it. But I'm going down the highway and I went by Steak and Shake. I have this bad habit, of course, of reading all the signs, everything else. I like to mess with pictures every once in a while. I think I want to publish some kind of coffee table book of church signs. Oh man, some of those are winners, okay? I'm going to tell a story within a story, okay? Stop. The other day I saw some church sign, literally the other day. And you probably, if you've seen it, then you stopped also. The church sign said, honest to goodness, on a busy road. It said, if you're thirsty, have another drink. Something's not right. And then on the other side of the sign, busy road, go both ways. I'm not sure I can pull this one off. At the fountain of living water. Okay? That'd be a fun poster in the book. Two sides or two pictures of the same thing. Back to my Steak and Shake story. I'm going down 33 and I look up and I see this sign. That was one of the most amazing signs. I mean, it almost stopped me on 33. That's not a good place to stop. But the sign simply said, our fountain never closes. I thought, oh wow. Somebody in there just stumbled upon a great theological truth. Or they are pretty good at double entendre statements. Our fountain never closes, but neither does mine. Because the old hymn said there is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's vein. We celebrated communion last week or the week before. And sinners plunged beneath that blood lose all their guilty stain. You see, when Jesus said on the cross, it's finished, what he meant was the full and the perfect plan of salvation has been provided for all of your needs and for all of the needs of the world. And guess what? It still works today. Why had Hagar not seen that fountain right in front of her eyes? Maybe just off to the distance a little bit, not very far. It may have been that her eyes were too blinded by her tears. It may have been that she was too busy counting her wrongs and her losses. Well, here's a much simpler question. What do you think Hagar did when she saw that fountain? Well, that's interesting. She's dying, her son's dying. As soon as she saw the fountain, she wrapped up that conversation with God and headed for the water. Are you thirsty? Are you hungry? There is one who claims to be the very bread of life. And he's closer, the scripture says, than the very breath that we breathe. John said in the 7th chapter, he said, if any thirst, just let him come to me and drink. Oh, everyone that is thirsty, Isaiah said, come to the waters. Well, I don't know how to wrap this up other than simply tell you what a story. Let me give you a little bit more to think about. It really hopefully will pull it into perspective. You ever, all those bad feelings of Abraham, Hagar, all of that misunderstanding and presumptuousness and taking decisions in your own hands rather than trusting God's timing. You ever wonder what in the world that has to do with anything? You know, so have you ever wondered why the Twin Towers tragedy occurred? Have you ever wondered, listening to the news in the last few hours, why Israel is hated by everyone, and her friends are few? I really date myself right now. Paul Harvey would say. Now you know the rest of the story.